South Carolina, 2012. In a quiet neighborhood just outside Columbia, South Carolina, a woman named Tamara had finally started to feel like things were normal again. She'd been through a lot. 5 kids, a recent breakup with her boyfriend of nearly a decade, and the heavy weight of starting over. But what Tamara didn't know was that her past hadn't quite let go of her. At first, it was just small things. Her pantry seemed emptier than usual, like snacks and leftovers were vanishing faster than her kids could eat them. The TV remote kept ending up in strange places. She even found the back door unlocked one morning, though she was sure she'd locked it the night before. Still, she chalked it all up to being tired, overwhelmed, or maybe the kids just being careless. But then it got weirder. Late one night, lying in bed after everyone had gone to sleep, Tamara heard something. Not the normal creaks of an old house. This was different. Soft scraping noises above her bedroom ceiling. Then, something even stranger. Faint pressure on the ceiling tiles, as if someone was moving just above them. One night, she swore she saw the nails from the ceiling panels shifting slightly, like they were being pushed from the other side. She told herself it was in her head. Maybe raccoons in the attic? But deep down, she felt something wasn't right. Then came the insulation. One morning, she woke up to find small bits of fiberglass insulation scattered across her pillow. It had fallen from the vent directly above her bed. That's when she knew. Something, or someone was up there. She didn't waste time. She called her 21-year-old nephew, Derek, and asked him to check the attic. He climbed up, flashlight in hand, expecting to find a raccoon or maybe a busted pipe. But what he found was far worse. In the corner of the attic, behind the HVAC unit, someone had made a nest. Piles of old coats, torn blankets, empty food wrappers, and plastic bottles filled with urine. And then a face staring at him through the dark. It was Tamara's ex-boyfriend. He'd been living up there, silently watching from the attic for over 2 weeks, using the air vent above Tamara's bed to spy on her and the children. He had snuck in one night, using an old key he'd never returned. No one heard him come in. No one knew he never left. He admitted everything when Derek forced him down. Said he didn't want to hurt anyone, just wanted to be close again. But when Tamara called the police, he'd already slipped away. They never found him. Tamara changed all the locks, had the attic sealed, and installed cameras. But even after all that, she couldn't sleep. For weeks, she imagined someone still up there, watching, breathing quietly while the house went silent. The scariest part wasn't that he had broken in. It was that he'd never really left. Tulsa, Oklahoma, February 2020. Eric Lawson, a 36-year-old computer programmer, had recently moved into a modest 2-story home on the east side of Tulsa, Oklahoma. The neighborhood was quiet. Too quiet, he used to joke with his co-workers. He lived alone and worked remotely, so he spent the majority of his time inside his home, only leaving a few times a week for groceries or short jogs. It wasn't until early February that he began to feel something wasn't quite right. It started small. A jar of peanut butter that seemed oddly low despite him not touching it for days. A bathroom light that had clearly been off when he went to bed, suddenly on in the morning. One morning, he swore the side door was unlocked, even though he never used it and always double-checked the locks. At first, he chalked it up to stress or forgetfulness. Being alone for days on end could do that to a person, right? But the disturbances grew more frequent. The thermostat had been adjusted twice. Items from the pantry were misplaced. One night, he thought he heard the soft squeak of floorboards upstairs, but when he checked, no one was there. Still, there were no signs of forced entry, and the motion sensors he'd installed in his front and backyards never triggered anything unusual. Then one Sunday afternoon, after return from a grocery run, he noticed muddy scuff marks on the wall just beneath the attic hatch in the hallway. It was odd. He hadn't even opened the attic since moving in. Curiosity turned into dread. He retrieved his flashlight, grabbed a small crowbar just in case, and slowly climbed the pull-down ladder into the attic. As the beam of light swept across the dusty insulation, his breath caught in his throat. In the far corner, Nestled between support beams was a thin mattress, a backpack, and a pile of clothes. Cans of tuna, protein bars, and bottled water were tucked neatly in a box nearby. And lying on the mattress, half covered in an old sleeping bag, was a man. He looked to be in his early 30s, pale, dirty, and asleep, or pretending to be. Eric froze. For a moment, he couldn't even speak. His flashlight trembled in his hand as he backed slowly down the ladder, heart racing. Once on solid ground, he rushed to his room, grabbed his handgun, and called the police. When officers arrived minutes later, the man was still in the attic. He didn't resist. In fact, he seemed dazed, as if waking from a long nightmare. He gave no name and no clear motive. All he said was, "I needed somewhere safe, somewhere quiet." Authorities later discovered that he had gained access to an old service stairwell on the side of the house, something Eric didn't even know existed. The man had been living in the attic for at least 6 days, surviving off food from the kitchen and slipping into main house when Eric was asleep or distracted. There was no prior connection between the intruder and Eric, no criminal record that matched fingerprints, just a man in the wrong place, clinging to shadows. He was charged with unlawful entry and trespassing. Eric was never physically harmed, but psychologically, the damage had been done. He moved out within a month. "I thought locking my doors meant I was safe," Eric later told a local reporter. "Now I check the attic, the basement, and every closet. Every night. I don't think I'll ever stop." Lisa Reynolds had just moved into a small 1950s bungalow in the suburbs of Portland, Oregon. Fresh off a tough breakup and ready to start over, she picked a little fixer-upper for its charm and quiet surroundings. The house was older, sure. It creaked, the plumbing moaned sometimes, but it felt like a clean slate. Just her rescue dog Benny, and a new chapter in life. For the first few weeks, everything was peaceful. But then the nights changed. It started with the breathing. At first, Lisa thought it was in her head, a soft, rhythmic exhale, like someone trying to stay silent. It always seemed to come from one side of the room, the wall just next to her bed. She moved her bed away. It kept happening. She even pressed her ear to the wall one night, trying to catch it. It was so faint, but real. And then came the tapping. Tiny, irregular taps, like someone tapping a single finger on wood. Always between 2 and 4 a.m. Lisa couldn't explain it. There were no trees brushing the house, no pets besides her dog, and Benny would growl at the wall some nights without warning. One night, Lisa stayed up, phone in hand, determined to record the noise. Instead, she heard a whisper, a soft voice, unintelligible, coming from the wall itself. That's when she panicked and left the house in the middle of the night to stay at a co-worker's apartment. When she told her co-worker, the girl laughed nervously and said, "Sounds haunted." But Lisa wasn't thinking ghosts. The sounds felt too human. After a week of sleeping on the couch, Lisa worked up the nerve to investigate the wall. Near the floor behind her nightstand was a small square panel, maybe 12 inches wide. Old, painted over and bolted shut, but not sealed. She fetched a crowbar and started prying. To her surprise, it popped open easily. The screws barely held anything. Behind it was a hollow cavity. Lisa turned on her phone's flashlight and peered in. At first, all she saw was dust and old insulation. But then her breath caught. There was a narrow passage, more than just wall space. It opened into a hidden crawl area, maybe 3 feet wide, leading into darkness. It stretched far deeper than any utility access should. She leaned in, inching her light further down the passage. That's when she saw him. A man, sitting cross-legged at the far end of the crawl space, knees pulled to his chest. His skin looked ashy, his face thin and hollow, and his eyes locked onto hers the second the light touched him. He didn't blink, didn't move, just stared at her. Lisa stumbled backward, dropped her phone, and ran out the front door barefoot, screaming. She didn't stop until she reached a neighbor's porch. The man never came out. When police arrived, they searched the crawl space. He was gone, but they found proof he had been there for weeks. maybe longer. A worn sleeping bag, stacks of food wrappers, a flashlight with dying batteries, and dozens of plastic bottles filled with urine. On the wooden beams and insulation were hundreds of charcoal drawings, most of them of Lisa. The scariest part? They discovered a man had been accessing the crawl space through a forgotten panel in the basement utility room. From there, the narrow space ran behind the walls of her bedroom, ending directly beside her bed. The sound she heard, the breathing, the tapping, the whispers. He had been inches from her every night, watching her, listening, and waiting. The man was never caught. Police believe he may have been homeless, or worse, a stalker who had chosen Lisa at random, a person who knew how to remain completely hidden. Lisa moved out that same week. She now lives in a gated apartment complex with 24-hour security and hasn't slept without a sound machine or therapy since. In the summer of 2021, 29-year-old Ryan Moore moved into a rental home in the outskirts of Austin, Texas. It was a charming 2-bedroom property with old hardwood floors, a wraparound porch, and thick oak trees in the backyard. The house came partially furnished, and the landlord was clear about one thing from the start. The guest room stays locked. It's just used for storage. Please don't try to access it. Ryan thought it was odd, but not a deal breaker. He signed the lease. The first month was peaceful. Ryan worked remotely and kept mostly to himself. But soon, small things started catching his attention. A cereal box he hadn't touched was open. His razor in the bathroom had been moved slightly. And once, while cleaning under the couch, he found a crumpled receipt from a gas station over 60 miles away, one he had never visited. He started to think maybe he was just forgetful, or maybe the landlord occasionally came in when he wasn't home, although that felt invasive. But then things escalated. One night, around 2:30 a.m., Ryan heard the distinct sound of soft footsteps upstairs. His bedroom was on the main floor, but the guest room was on the second, the same locked room. He froze in bed, every muscle tense. The sound continued for several seconds, then silence. He called out, "Hello? Is someone up there?" No response. The next morning, he mentioned it to the landlord. The man casually laughed it off. Probably the house settling. Old floorboards creak all the time. But Ryan wasn't convinced. A few days later, he set up a small motion sensor camera facing the stairwell. That night, he reviewed the footage around 3 a.m. There was movement, a shadowy figure descending halfway down the stairs before turning around and going back up. Ryan was stunned. He called the police immediately. They searched the property from top to bottom. The guest room door was still locked, but when they forced it open, what they found was chilling. The room was far from a storage space. It had been lived in. Inside was a sleeping mat, several bags of food, clothing, and a battery-powered lantern. There were even notebooks, pages and pages of writing. Most were lists, Ryan's grocery items, what time he left and returned home, who had visited. The scariest page read, "Wednesday, try again while he showers." Police determined that the person had been living in the house the entire time Ryan had been there. They had likely entered months before Ryan moved in, possibly during renovations, and had been hiding in the locked guest room ever since. There was no sign of forced entry. The landlord insisted he didn't know. He said the door had been locked and hadn't been opened in years. But somehow, someone had access from the inside. Fingerprint analysis later identified the squatter as a woman in her late 40s with a long record of petty theft and trespassing. She had gone unnoticed for over 6 weeks, sneaking down at night, eating food, even using the shower while Ryan was asleep. Ryan moved out that same week and filed a lawsuit against the landlord for negligence. To this day, he says the worst part wasn't the footage or the notebooks. It was the realization that while he slept peacefully, just one floor above him, someone was living silently, watching,